Hello everyone, welcome back to Story of the World Chapter Highlights. I'm Sophie teacher and today we're talking about chapter 36 of your Story of the World 4 books. Now today talks about everything that was happening in America, especially during the 1960s. So last time we were talking kind of about the issues between America and Russia, the Soviet Union, and now we're moving more into internal conflicts that were happening within the United States, okay? Now, if you remember from last time, at this time, the president of the United States was John F. Kennedy, or JFK as he's often called. Now, JFK was a very popular president. Lots of people really liked him. He'd really helped America, be more prosperous. He'd done a lot for America. So he's a very popular president. And as time was coming to re-elect president, he had a good chance of becoming president again. But him and his wife, Jackie, decided to do a tour of the United States in order to, get more votes and remind people that, they were there and who they were and all that kind of thing, okay? But unfortunately, this trip didn't end very well for JFK. It wasn't a successful trip. So as we have here, they were making their way around the United States at this time and going to lots of different places. And on November 22nd, 1963, they were in Dallas, Texas. In Dallas, Texas, they were driven around in a car with the roof down. There were 6 people in the car. There was a driver, a security service member, the governor of Dallas, his wife, and then JFK and his wife, Jackie Onassis. Now, as they were traveling by motor car, shots rang out throughout Dallas, and JFK was shot once in the neck and once in the back of the head. Now, they tried to rush him straight to hospital, but unfortunately he didn't survive, and the President of the United States had been assassinated. Now, his wife, Jackie, was right next to him in the car. Her outfit at that time was it's quite a famous outfit. She was wearing like a pink kind of suit. And she refused to change it. She said, I want them to see what they've done. I want them to see what they've done to my husband. So she left the clothes, even though they had blood and other things on them. She wanted people to see what had happened to her husband. Now, this was shocking in the United States. And at this time, Lyndon B. Johnson was the vice president of the United States, and he had to step up as the new acting president. And at first, they wanted him to rush back to Washington and do speeches and that kind of thing, but he refused to leave Dallas without JFK's body. Now, he wasn't the first president to have been assassinated. You might have heard before there has been multiple other presidents who've been assassinated, or others who it's been an attempted assassination. So one of the most famous is probably Abraham Lincoln, who was shot in the theater as he watched a play. There was Garfield and McKinley. So he wasn't the first one to be assassinated, but he was the first one in, memory where people were taking pictures and videos and all that kind of thing. Now, the man they think did this was Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was an ex-Marine, and a Marine is basically kind of similar to someone who would be in the Navy. And it is, kind of a soldier, basically. A soldier who normally works on boats or submarines and that kind of thing. So he was an ex-Marine, and he was the one who was suspected of killing JFK. He worked in the building that the shots came out from. And, when he was approached by officers, he did have a gun, and he ended up shooting the officer and killing the officer as well. So as he was arrested, he was taken in for questioning, and a nightclub owner by the name of Jack Ruby saw him and shouted, "You killed the president of the United States." And Jack Ruby shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald. So we never really found out what happened. He was killed not long after JFK. There are a lot of conspiracy theories around this. This is, kind of what is known, is that he was shot and Lee Harvey Oswald was the main suspect. Now, the second part of our chapter today talks all about the civil rights movement in America, which you might have already heard of before as well. Now, it had been a long time since slavery had ended in America, but there was still a lot of issues for Black people in America at that time. And there was something called segregation. Now, segregation was also known as Jim Crow laws. Segregation literally means segregated. It means people being separated. So it was whites and Blacks were separated and they weren't allowed to do things in the same places, okay? Black people could actually be arrested if they did do these things. So for example, some things that where there was separation, there would be different schools for white and Black people. There would be different beauty shops, barber shops, different restaurants as well. And in buses, there would be a different section for Black people to white people. And yeah, if the Black people sat in the white part of the restaurant, or if they sat in the white part of the bus, they would be arrested. This was also even common in cinemas and that kind of thing, in movie theaters. But yeah, there was a lot of different places, even graveyards, everywhere was segregated, okay? And, you know, Black people started to get frustrated. They were Americans too. Why didn't, you know, we learned that quote, right? All men are created equal. So Black people were like, why is that not us? It's in the Constitution. We're American. Why doesn't that, you know, stand for us? It doesn't say all men are created equal except for us. So this is when the civil rights movement started. And this started in South Carolina. Civil rights was people fighting, Black people fighting for their rights in America. Now, a few different cases happened during this time, including Brown versus Board of Education, where it was people arguing that there should be mixed schools. And the Supreme Court actually agreed in favor of Black people at this time. They said it is against the Constitution to segregate people and treat them differently. All men are created equal, okay? Now, there was lots of different things that happened during this time. Another thing that happened was the famous case of Rosa Parks. So Rosa Parks was sitting in the Black section of a bus, in a inner city bus in Alabama. And she was told to move. So there was basically white people couldn't sit in the same row as Black people. And there was 3 Black people sitting down and a white man didn't have a seat. So the 3 Black people were told they had to stand up in order for the one white person to sit down. So 2 of the people moved, but Rosa Parks refused. She was like, no, I have every right to sit down on this bus. Why should I move for a white person? Okay. So that's what she did. She sat down and she didn't move and she was arrested. Okay, so Rosa Parks was arrested. She was later released and became a big part of the civil rights movement and even got a job in government. Okay, another person who became kind of the leader of the civil rights movement was Pastor Martin Luther King Jr. Now, you might have heard of Martin Luther before. We talked about that religion, right? Maybe end of book 3, start of book 4. So he was actually named after this. His father named himself Martin Luther after the religion, and then it passed down to be him, so Martin Luther King Jr., okay? Now, yeah, he was a pastor, and lots of people respected him for his speeches and the way he was able to talk. So lots of Black people pushed him kind of to be the leader of the civil rights movement because they knew how well he could do and how good his speeches were. So he ended up traveling around as well and doing civil rights speeches. You might have heard his famous speech, I Have a Dream, as well, okay? So yeah, he was a really big figure in the civil rights movement. Now, in September 4th, 1957, in Little Rock, Arkansas, they finally, you know, the government had finally said, okay, segregation in schools is not right. So we are going to start having mixed schools, okay? So Elizabeth Eckford was one of the first Black women, or Black girls at the time, to join what had been a predominantly white school. Now, as she got to the school with her books, she had a lot of resistance. White students sat shouting at her, saying quite aggressive and, you know, offensive language towards her, as well as some slurs and that kind of thing. And also the governor of Arkansas, he didn't agree with the new law. He thought people should be segregated. So he actually sent the National Guard. The National Guard is normally a state kind of soldier army, basically. They can't do anything on a national level, but they can do something on a state level. So the governor of Arkansas sent the National Guard in to stop her from entering the school. But, you know, Elizabeth was defiant. She was a very brave person. And her and the other girls who'd been sent to the school really tried to get their way in, but it was impossible with the National Guard and the governor stopping them. Okay, he really didn't want to listen to the law. So this is when the president stepped in, okay? The president said she has rights, okay? She has the rights. We have changed the law. She is able to do this, okay? So the president ended up sending federal soldiers. Now, if you remember federal soldiers or federal, you know, when it talks about federal, you're talking about national level. So federal soldiers were much higher up than the National Guard, and federal soldiers stepped in to basically walk Elizabeth into school every day in order to make sure she safely got into school and, was able to complete her rights as an American citizen. Now, in 1964, Congress finally passed the Civil Rights Act, which stopped segregation and allowed schools to mix and lots of other places such as restaurants. Then in 1965, there was the Voting Rights Act, which gave Black people the right to vote, which was a very big step in the civil rights movement. Now, finally, in April 4th, 1968, as Martin Luther King Jr. did one of his speeches to a crowd, he was shot and killed. And unfortunately, he was killed and didn't survive. And this was, had a big impact on the civil rights movement. And it showed that no matter the law changing, there was still a lot of issues between white and Black people in the United States of America. Okay, well done, everyone. See you next time.